Winterview, sitting in the car, pre-coffee, morning drive on the way to work. As usual, apologies in advance for the audio quality. Hopefully it's acceptable to audiophiles. Today's talk, the world. The world. We often think, or the mind reports, that we live in a world. Or do we? We will explore this subject of great confusion. This relates to other subjects that I might have spoken about. Can't think of any off the top of my head. Should have had my coffee. Not to worry. Nay, bother. Right. The first thing to define, I suppose, is, or clarify, the mind's propensity to objectify. The mind is the reporter or descriptor of experience. I've spoken briefly about the two qualities of mind, the imaginal, fantasy, dreaming mind. It's the mind that kind of fools you. And then there's the sort of hidden, unconscious, you might even say, processing mind that figures stuff out without you really being aware of it. The imaginal, conceptualizing mind is the mind that portrays images and impressions and thoughts streaming across or through consciousness moment by moment. One of the more fascinating concepts the mind believes in is something called the world. We think we live in a world. I live in the world, we hear people say when asked, where do you live? But is it so? Do we live in a world? Direct experience would suggest no. Let me elaborate. Presently, I'm driving down my driveway. I can see trees to my left, hedges to my right, a field in the distance, sunny, clear blue sky. There's a river. It's like a postcard. That's my direct experience. That's my immediate experience. Also, I've got my air conditioner blowing cool air in my face. I can feel my shoes for some reason. I don't know why. And the fabric on the body. This is the immediate experience. And second to that, this is the immediate experience using conceptual language, defining bits and pieces, trees, rivers, views, cold air, road, etc. Stepping out of the car for a moment to put the garbage in the bin. I'm explaining the noises as I go along. The direct experience, about to get a whiff, garbage bin. Got a whiff. Is of garbage bin right now. Crunching road under feet. Opening car door. Sitting back in driver's seat in air-conditioned comfort. As far as I know, that's it. That is the immediate experience. Now, does that mean there's a world because of that immediate experience? The answer in immediate experience is I don't know. How could I know that? how can I know there's a world? How can I know that I'm in a world? The only way that I know that is that mind or thought is reporting world. Another way of looking at it is the direct experience. My immediate experience relies on various sensory phenomenon, which is a more scientific way, we might say, of looking at experience. There's sights, smells, tastes, etc. Not so many tastes, but anyway. The scientist who might be materialist by nature would say that the senses are detecting stimuli in the world and then reporting them, or rather translating them in the brain into into reality, or into the object that exists out in the world. This is a very common point of view. It's a good model. It makes sense logically. So at the moment I can see loads of trees. Always a good example. So the mind assumes naturally that the light is hitting the tree, bouncing off the tree, hitting the retina, going up the optic nerve and impulses and translating into an image of tree in the brain, where it's reported, labelled, categorized and filed so seamlessly, so quickly, so effortlessly that we don't even consider it. And then when we do stop to consider it, we imagine that there must have really been a tree there out in the world for the light to bounce and come into the eye. But that's an assumption. We assume that there must have been a tree in the world. We can't imagine a tree just appearing spontaneously out of nothing in that immediate moment and then vanishing again once it's out of consciousness or awareness. That doesn't seem likely to the average human. So not liking that means we prefer the more stable, solid conceptualization of the world. So therefore I naturally presume that while I'm driving away from that tree, it still exists back somewhere down the road. And tonight on the way home, I will pass that tree again, completing the model of the world. So the model of the world seems to stand up. It seems to hold water as a model. But there are holes in the model. It's not a perfect model. The most glaringly obvious example of why that doesn't hold much water, or the model is imperfect, is that experience of the tree is ever-changing. I'll never experience that tree in the same way again. It'll seem like I do, but if I was to nuance it down to the infinitesimal level of detail, it would clearly be a somewhat different experience every time. This portrays an ever-shifting, ever-changing appearance, or suggests, I should say, an ever-changing appearance. The fact that the mind can solidify the appearance with a single word, world or tree, is part of the illusion, completing the illusion that the world is a solid, stable place out there. The other obvious flaw, you might say, in the model is it relies heavily, extremely heavily, in fact, on the idea or assumption of a person, an I. That is, I exist separate to the world. I'm over here, the world is over there. Now that's not challenged or not barely registered in the mind of the average person. But if we stop to think about it, it fully requires that duality, the individual here and the world over there. If we removed the individual from the equation, what do we have? Suddenly we have no here or there, no out there, no in here, no world. It's gone. Just everything. But that's impossible to know until that's experienced. So reification, process of seemingly solidifying conceptual stuff, masses of stuff into singular, seemingly solid objects, is a brilliant feat of mind. It does it naturally, effortlessly. But because it can do it, we often are fooled into thinking that it represents reality. So there's another difficulty there, that we have to presume, there's a big P, presume, that the content of consciousness, that which we're registering in awareness, is real. We have to presume that in order for the world to exist as a model. So there's another presumption there, something called reality. The other part of the model is, because it's appearing, it must have existence. It must be there somehow. It must be in existence, like a solid object. So the idea of solidity and existence built in to the concept of the world. And is the world that problematic as a model for the average person on the whole? Not really. Day to day, it's not really going to blow your mind. But it gets interesting sometimes, especially in mental health, because we tend to, or at least the individuals who come for help in mental health, often have ideas about the world. Many people have ideas about the world. So the world, rather than being a benign object sitting peacefully in the background, takes on characteristics. A good world, bad world, awesome world, and so on and so forth. If you have consistently experienced negative phenomena, you might start to get the idea that it's not a very nice world. And it's a very global cognition, a very global idea that tends to tarnish all experience, and it tends to skew perspective on experience. With realization, liberation, enlightenment, one of the epiphenomena, you might say, one of the side effects, is a returning back to a mystery, a very deep mystery, where the solidity of the world is no longer so apparent. The fixed ideas, you might say, are now uncertain or appear empty, they appear as that which they are, ideas. The conceptual nature of reality is revealed. That's another way of defining what enlightenment is. It's a seeing through of the concepts as hollow or empty or provisional or just exactly what they are, concepts. Before enlightenment, you might say, terrible expression by the way, but before enlightenment, concepts are seen as real somehow, solid, fixed things, so that everything takes on a solidness that perhaps it doesn't deserve. I can't think of a better word, but concepts are seen as actually real. The mind is seen as the arbiter and sort of the well, let me put it this way. The mind is believed to be 100% correct without any question. And that's why liberation or enlightenment can be quite shocking for some people on realization, because the concepts are suddenly seen as empty, hollow, ephemeral even, dreamlike. You can get a sense of that if you meditate or if you get yourself into a relaxed state. The world, the edges that were hard, seem to crumble, fall away. I like the direct experience model, and bearing in mind that that too is a model, because it reminds me of the transient, ever-changing nature of the world. The fact that it's never the same moment to moment. Even when I think it's the same, there's always a subtle difference. There's always a movement in consciousness, or consciousness, you might say, is this eternal movement of form. Therefore, there is no world except as concept. There is no good or bad or any particular valence on that world, any value on that world, except as it is judged by the mind. The world only seems to be there as long as there's a person believed to exist, because that person, the mind might suggest, has to exist somewhere. Therefore, it must have a world in which to have that person exist. You can see that once one concept is locked in, it requires a whole reshuffling of other concepts to make it fit. If there's a person, if I exist as an individual, I have to exist somewhere. I'm not free floating in a invisible soup of nothing. I must be somewhere. And where else would I be except in a world? So the idea is I was born into a world, I'm now living in a world, and I will die. And some people might say even, I will leave the world. And we hear that expression used with people who have died. They've left the world. So the idea of the world is extremely pervasive. It's very... it transcends cultures. Every culture seems to have an idea of the world. But what if there is no independent individual? There's no one home, so to speak. There suddenly is, if there's no one here, and I've talked about this in other dialogues, time and space, they go. There's no here or there, there's no before or later. There's just an everythingness, you might say. If there's an everythingness and there's no individual, there's just the raw immediate experience apparently happening. It doesn't need a world anymore. There's no need to conceptualize a world, because there's no one there to be placed somewhere in time and space. So the world is a perfect model to explain space-time, the space-time reality. The here, the isness, the solidness in time of me in the world. We could go on and discuss all the ways people conceptualize the world, but I don't think it's particularly necessary in this dialogue. The other thing to say is, once it's believed in, once the world is seen to be this solid, real object, there can be a confusion for the seeker. The one seeking enlightenment might not quite understand how enlightenment can happen. Like they'll tend to conceptualize people as enlightened, the enlightened person who lives in a world. It's hard to describe that concept, but they tend to, the mind tends to tar everyone with the same brush. Everyone else lives in the world. The other thing that's interesting about the concept of the world is you'll see it in the news, the idea that the world is going a certain direction. It's this or it's that. It's going downhill. The world is going up in flames. The world is getting worse, and so on. We don't know that. We don't know that the world is getting worse, because, of course, that would require an infinite knowledge of time and space and an infinite knowledge of value. We have to know everything there is to know about everything before we can place a value judgment on it, which is ridiculous. The other interesting thing I wanted to mention about the world is without a person in the center, without a mind conceptualizing the individual in a body in a world, there's a very, I can't think of a word except beautiful, a fineness to the experience. It's a softness to the experience. The world becomes ghost-like, soft. It's not as serious or dangerous as it used to be. But when there's a person there, seemingly to be a person there in the body, who experiences the world, the mind is forced, so to speak, to define edges very tightly, and it tends to give the world a hard-edged feeling, a sort of it takes away the softness, you might say. And I find interesting is the word define, in that sense, implies the removing of fineness, of the fineness of the world. When we go down to a more micro-level experience of the world, looking at the small, nuanced details of our direct experience. At the moment, for example, I'm driving along with my hand on the steering wheel, the other hand on a beer. Just kidding. Seeing if you're paying attention. The hand on the steering wheel in direct experience is a cool, hard, plasticky, sensory experience to that. That when I rub the hand gently on the wheel, I can't really tell the boundaries without looking where hand is and where wheel is. There's certainly something happening in the experience, but what's happening exactly, I couldn't tell you. There's a blurring as we look down at the nuanced experience of the world. The conceptualization of the world, therefore, requires a type of blindness to those nuanced experiences, a sort of overlooking and a globalization of concepts, just to make it easy for the mind to grasp. But when it's looked in detail, down to the micro level, the world, the edges blur and vanish. I can't tell where I am and the wheel is. If I was to close my eyes, not that I'm going to do that while driving, the world suddenly loses its sense of locale. I don't know where I am and where the world is with my eyes closed. If I was to block my ears and close my eyes, chopping out two of the major senses, the conceptualization of the world would be more challenging. I wouldn't know up or down or here or there or where I am or where the world is. So the senses all play into the conceptualizing very nicely, very seamlessly of the world. So you can do this exploration if you want, not driving. It's a bit of a silly place to do it, but sitting and quietly closing your eyes, tuning out, and wondering where you are and where the world is. Where does it begin? Where does it end? Does it begin? Does it end? Where am I and where is the world? Am I here and the world there? Or is it all one? Is it one experience? Anyway, I'm starting to tune out as I lose the boundaries of the world. Hard to talk about this subject without falling away into that delicious nothingness that I am. So I better stop. And I better pull it together and get a coffee very shortly. This has been Winterview with another brief dialogue. Until later, comments welcome.